historically, so that we can learn more about those things. So there is a booklet about Olmsted that Vicki authored, and the first 45 folks who make a donation can get a signed copy from Vicki, and we will send that off to you. So we invite you to support that, and we will also make sure that we put that donation link in the chat in case you would like to take advantage of that throughout. So at this time, I'm going to introduce our moderator, and there will also be a video. And once I finish my part, I'm going to be in the background and let others be in charge for the rest of the day. I'm excited about that. Serge, Dr. Serge Pierre-Louis will be moderating our discussion today. And Serge is very special to Friends of the Parks. He spent 20 years on our board of directors, and his most favorite project has always been DuSable Park. As a Haitian immigrant himself, it has been very key to his passion and leadership to bring to bear this remembrance in Chicago of a Black Haitian leader who was so critical to what we now know as Chicago. Serge, as mentioned, is a doctor, he's an MD, and he also spends a lot of time bringing his expertise back and forth to his country of Haiti as well. We're thankful for his leadership in so many ways within our organization and in Chicago. And with that, I turn it over to the video and to Serge. Thanks all.
Let's see. Hello, Juanita, thank you very much for your introduction. And hello to everybody. I think this is an exciting time because this is an exciting project talking about the value that we put in names of people and names of places. This is such an appropriate discussion for us to have this year in Chicago and across the country. So I'm really looking forward to having this discussion with two people that are very important to our project today. One of them being Courtney Joseph, who is a history professor at Lake Forest College. And we'll have a chance to get into the details of her background a little later. And then the other person joining us in this discussion today will be Monica Rickert, who is an artist, an illustrator, and from with a Pottawatomie background, and affiliated with the American Indian Center in Chicago. So we're gonna start this discussion with the two of them, and we may invite some other people to participate. However, before we get into that, I believe that we have a video that we're gonna be watching first, if I'm not mistaken. And then after the video, I will come back with Courtney and Monica to start the actual conversation, part 2 of this program, which is the conversation. So did I get that right, Juanita? Is the video gonna be next?
I believe that is correct. Take it away, folks behind the scenes who make the magic work.
Excellent. So we'll do that then. The video, I believe, is gonna be talking about the advocacy of the DuSable Park Coalition that we have been in existence now for 20 years. And the coalition, let me just give you a brief introduction to actually what you're gonna be seeing. Back in the year 2000, the Chicago Park District was willing to name a new harbor after Jean Baptiste Pointe DuSable, the DuSable Harbor, and they were asking for public input. So we went to that meeting and of the Park District to give our input, And this is where we met some of the members or friends of the parks. They were also there at that meeting. And that's when they told us that there was a piece of land that Mayor Harold Washington had dedicated to be the future DuSable Park. It had been sitting there since 1987. Nothing had happened. And most likely it was gonna be turned into a parking lot. And this is when we said no. We put our foot down and we said, no, we're not gonna let that happen. And we were invited by Friends of the Parks to come to a meeting to discuss the park. And that's when we found out there were several other civic organizations with the same interest. And we all sat around a table and started brainstorming and strategizing under the leadership of Friends of the Parks. And this is how the DuSable Park Coalition actually was born. And we've been at it for the last 2 decades since then. So we are so appreciative of the leadership of Friends of the Parks for keeping us on our toes now for 20 years and focusing on the park itself. And as Juanita just mentioned, we are finally, we think we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. We are not sure yet. But we have the impression that there is some light at the end of the tunnel regarding the park. And we are hoping in the next few years, it will become reality. But the story of the DuSable Park Coalition in the last 20 years is something that is fascinating. The video will not be able to tell you everything about us. It will be too long, but you'll have a little idea of what we've been doing in the last 20 years. So having said that, I'm gonna let them play the video and then we'll come back and start our discussion after that.
Friends of the Parks has been happy to participate and support in the decades-long advocacy battle for the actualization of DuSable Park. There have been many groups that came before, and there have been many groups that have been part of the process along the way, and Friends of the Parks has played the role in trying to help hold the coalition together and amplify the voice of the many community organizations that have been advocating for DuSable Park. Starting back in 1987, when Mayor Harold Washington dedicated the site just at the confluence of Lake Michigan and the Chicago River to be the future DuSable Park. Friends of the Parks advocates for the completion of our lakefront park system. And as a city that has about 30 miles of lakefront, we have about 26 miles of completed park and path system. Completing DuSable Park is a part of making sure that Chicago completes that entire park and path system. So we have been sometimes playing a very loud role in supporting this work and sometimes done that work very much from behind the scenes. But for many years, we've been part of the DuSable Park Coalition, doing the annual wreath-laying commemoration of the death of DuSable in August. And participating with and supporting the tour along the DuSable Heritage Corridor. We look forward to the completion of the park in a few years. We are so excited that the remediation of the site, getting rid of the pollution that was left behind by the industrial use there, has been completed this year. And we are ecstatic about the $10 million commitment from Related Midwest to help build the park in conjunction with the new development they're doing just across the way. And then the recent $5 million commitment from the city of Chicago, in which Mayor Lori Lightfoot announced that OSIF funds, Open Space Impact Fee funds, to the tune of $5 million would be made available to complete the $15 million budget of the park. So after many decades of fighting for this park, the many partners are so excited that we think we may see the light at the end of the tunnel. So this year's celebration of DuSable's death, as we do each year, has been especially significant because it took place on August 29th, which is the actual day of his death, but also because this year marks such a big step forward in making sure that DuSable Park really does come to life.
About 12,000 to 18,000 years ago, this Great Lakes region was inhabited by a number of First Nation peoples, such as the Miami, the Pottawatomie, the Fox, the Sauk, among others. You know. So they established a vast network of trade among themselves and also with other peoples in the other Native American tribes throughout North America and even beyond. From time to time, some European explorers would drop by, but none of them decided to stay.
My involvement with DuSable Park has gone on for over 33 years. I started out working with the late Mayor Harold Washington as executive director and commissioner of his first Chicago Commission on Women. I was a member of Harold's cabinet. Harold also worked closely with Dr. Margaret Burroughs, who at that time was our founding director of the DuSable Museum, and she had also been appointed commissioner of the Chicago Park District. Dr. Burroughs, along with the late Harold Washington, also worked with Ramon Price, who at that time was curator of the DuSable Museum and also the half-brother of Harold Washington. It was always our desire to have some place or some monument, some street named after Jean Baptiste Pointe DuSable, who was the founder of the city of Chicago. And this started happening in 1987 when Harold Washington decided to have a piece of land named along the Chicago River as DuSable Park. That took place in 1987. And for over 33 years, that has been the goal of our DuSable Museum Harold Washington Coalition, to have a park named after DuSable. It has been a long struggle, but here in 2020, we are still here, decided and dedicated to the fact that we need to have this park completed.
As I said before, many explorers went through here and decided not to stay. And this plaque here is a tribute to those explorers who did not stay. It's a tribute to Marquette, to LaSalle, to Joliet, all of them. But somebody's missing there. And it pains me to see that. So DuSable himself, okay, that black man of Haitian descent. So the founder of Chicago, is not represented here. And it is something that needs to be redressed. Because he was here, he decided to stay. He established a community here.
Starting in 1986, Mayor Washington was able to make connections with the Art Institute. And the Art Institute set aside money in the Ferguson Fund that would enable an artist to be hired to create a sculpture of DuSable to be placed in DuSable Park.
This piece is called Founders, and basically it's really interesting right now as we're thinking about monuments and who gets to make monuments and what we make monuments about. So essentially it's a portable sculpture. It's 30 feet tall, And the idea was a part of our Cultural Transit Assembly exhibition with the Floating Museum last year. We moved this around the city adjacent to the Green Line and spaces on the west side and the south side. Sometimes we let people know we were coming. Sometimes we just magically popped up in the park. And essentially, just to break it down a little bit, it's actually an exhibition. We did this piece in collaboration with Monica Rickert, who is actually Pottawatomie and half African-American, half Pottawatomie. And we worked with the Field Museum and DuSable Museum, and then another artist named Chris Poppin, along with us, who is also an artist of indigenous descent. So let me just give you a little bit of a tour. So there are 4 heads based on the cardinal directions, which are real important in indigenous cultures. So basically north, west, south, and east. On this side here, this is an image of Kittihawa, who was the wife of Jean Baptiste Pointe DuSable. And as little as that is known about Jean Baptiste Pointe DuSable, there are no images of him other than kind of recreations based on descriptions. We work a lot with artists to kind of think about making our own portraits, putting a face to a name. So this is actually Monica Rickert, who is an artist, I explained. And while she was helping us think about a monument to Kittihawa, or that portion, we asked her if she would sit as the model. So it's important to put faces to things. So over here to the left, we have Harold Washington, and we honor Harold Washington in a way of not only being the first African-American mayor of Chicago, but he also designated the parkland for Jean Baptiste DuSable back in the 80s. So we kind of acknowledge him. And that actually is a sculpture by an unknown artist that comes from DuSable Museum's collection. So we're able to scan it, blow it up, and work with DuSable Museum through a series of exhibitions. So we're really proud to have that here. On the back side is an image of Jean Baptiste DuSable that actually Etzer Kontav, who is a member of the DuSable Heritage Association, actually modeled for us as well. So we just thought, once again, thinking about not only having an image, a representation of a person, but also thinking about people's, acknowledging people's work to acknowledge those moments. So we're really proud to have Etzer kind of model for us. And then the other one is kind of an unknown boy. It was a sculpture from the DuSable Museum's collection made by an artist named William Artiste. It's one of the earliest pieces in their collection. We're excited to scan that and put it in. So you have the 4 heads kind of representing founders, and maybe in a way of acknowledging people's contributions that often aren't considered to be on that kind of founding sculpture.
So that's why it should be remembered, you know, as a true leader in this city, the first business entrepreneur, the first real estate developer, the first hotelier, the first administrator, the first city administrator. He was all that together. So it is really a pleasure to be talking about the founder of Chicago, Jean Baptiste Pointe DuSable, along with his wife, Kittihawa.
This is our last piece right now, and I am standing in front of what's gonna be the future DuSable Park. Right behind me, there is the Chicago River. On my left is Lake Michigan, and across from the Chicago River, that piece of land that you are seeing there is gonna be the future DuSable Park. And as you can see, it is right next to Navy Pier and the lakefront. So this is an important part of Chicago. It's lakefront. And we are happy that DuSable is gonna have his home right there at the entrance to the city from the lake into the Chicago River. I must tell you that 200 years ago, if you had come here like this on a weekday or even on a Saturday, you would have seen hundreds of ships and boats coming in, some of them all the way from Canada, some of them from Europe, crossing the Atlantic and through the St. Lawrence River, would go down Lake Michigan and come and enter the Chicago River to bring merchandises and everything else into toward the Mississippi River and all the way down to New Orleans. So Chicago was strategically right at the center of commerce between Europe and the southern part of the United States. And that's probably what Jean Baptiste Pointe DuSable understood somehow. He understood the importance of this little area and came and settled here and married Kittihawa of the Pottawatomie tribe and started this beautiful city that you are watching right now. Going back to the park, we went through the first phase, which was to clean up the radioactive thorium. We are done with that. Then we went to the second phase, which was to actually replace the metal sheet revetment. You can see all around the land, there is a metal sheet. This is brand new, just replaced by the EPA and the Chicago Park District. And the third phase is gonna be the actual construction of the park. We are waiting for Related Midwest to start its own construction across from Lakeshore Drive. They're gonna put one tower, then they're gonna build the park, and after that, they're gonna build their second tower. So we are hoping that 5 years from now, you're gonna see a different skyline because of the new towers, but you're gonna also see a new park right here, and we invite you to come and join us and spend some time on DuSable Park so we can tell all good stories about the good old times while we are sitting on the park. Here we go. I think I am unmuted now. Can everybody hear me? Abigail, you can hear me? And Juanita?
I hear you perfectly.
Good, good. Okay, so thank you very much for showing our advocacy videotape. I hope everybody enjoyed it. So now I'd like to bring our two guests online. As I mentioned earlier, the first one is Courtney Joseph, and who is a history teacher at the Lake Forest College. And then she will be together with Monica Rickert. Now you all know about her. And so I'd like to start with Courtney. Courtney, as a historian, when you hear a title like this, what is in the name of Jean Baptiste Pointe DuSable as founder of Chicago? And how does that relate to the future DuSable Park? What are your thoughts on that, on the meaning of using those names?
First, thank you for having me, Friends of the Park. It's always good. Friends of the Parks, I'm sorry, to collaborate with you all. Juanita, it's always good to see you. And that was a wonderful video to start us off. As a historian, as a history professor, I think a lot about the power of naming, especially for people of marginalized identities, people whose histories are often left out for various reasons. I'm just gonna start off early and just say racism is usually involved in that, right? Various forms of bigotry find themselves in our archives, and so that we cannot know the histories of people who look like us, because there's power in knowing history and there's also power in naming things. And if you name a person of color as the, we're colloquially using founder, I would more accurately say first non-native settler, that once we name that, then what we're doing is drawing attention to how, despite our national narratives about people of color being simply the labor force at best, oftentimes, if they're even found in our national histories, then if we name a person of color, a Black man, a man of Haitian descent, as, again, being formative to how Chicago is developed, then we have to wrestle with why it's so important to continue to perpetuate that legacy versus to speak about how there's a more varied history of Black people in this country.
Thank you very much, Courtney. So that is the perspective, therefore. How often do we have a Black person being the founder of a city like Chicago? And why aren't we talking more about that? So that's certainly something we can explore further. But before we do that, I'd like to bring in Monica. Monica Rickert, our superstar of the day. We just saw her huge head by Michigan Lake. I'm hoping that in real life, your head is not as big, Monica. So Monica, from your standpoint, and you are in a unique position as somebody at the crossroad between Native American culture, the indigenous people, the Pottawatomie group, and then also being the son of a Black man. So pretty much you are a representation of what happened between Kittihawa and Jean Baptiste from their union. So, and also as an artist, what is your perspective on the meaning of those names?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really loving seeing all of the acknowledgement for, the indigenous cultures that were here ahead of time, because, this was our land. And it's really why this story in particular speaks to me, is because it shows such a beautiful union of these two different cultures and just various mixing, and them having the foresight to realize there's something more that we can do and we can aim for and we can strive for, where we can all get together and enjoy this land and do something together. So I really, anything that has to do with DuSable, I really want to support, because you don't hear enough about mixed culture or mixed couples coming together and really striving for something like creating a whole new city with a new vision of what that can be. So I know that names carry weight. As you know, American Indians are still trying to figure out, do we go by Native? Do we go by Indigenous? How do we define ourselves? So it is something that will carry on into the future, and we're trying to think, okay, well, how do we look at the past, the present, and the future? And I would just like to see more of these discussions like this in the future.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And it's nice to hear your perspective. But while we are talking about that, one question that often comes at the table is, what was the land like before DuSable arrived? The Pottawatomies, that was their land, as you just pointed out. They lived here, they had their cultures, their customs. And perhaps Courtney can jump into this as well. What do we know historically? What was life like before the arrival of DuSable?
Well, from what I know very much about indigenous tribes, there was a lot of migration, and it wasn't always like everybody just settled here and this was just their set space. The land needed time to heal and to grow, but this was a very good area for commerce. I mean, we have the river, we have this giant lake. There was a lot of ways to get to this area, so it was a good meeting ground. So there was a lot of different migration that would happen. So this wasn't only Pottawatomie land. Other members of the Three Fires, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Odawa, Pottawatomie were part of that, but also Sac and Fox would be around the area, Menominee, Ho-Chunk, like there was multiple tribes. So it was really, I know it was more of a trading post, like in general, just because it was already well established. But yeah, it was really nice to see it. So non-native people that started to come in and how they were able to embrace, these new forms of trade.
So therefore, the Native Americans already gave the example of having several groups, ethnic groups working together and living together.
Yeah.
And when DuSable arrived, they embraced him and he married into their tribe, one of them. So that was truly the first example of multiculturalism that existed right here as the United States were being born. So we go back 200 years with that already existing as an example of what we can do now that we are trying to live together. Why don't we go back 200 years ago and learn from the people who were there and did that already from the start? So Courtney, I know you've been looking a little bit into that. At one point, the Newberry Library had a whole collection on Native Americans, their life, their culture, their commerce in the American Midwest at the very beginning, the early days of Chicago. Did you find anything more than what we are talking about here?
That actually goes outside of the scope of my research. My research is much more focused on that connection moment between DuSable and Kittihawa and his travels to what would be considered New France or the French Empire in the late 1700s. And so my research is really thinking about how this is a different story of connection, a different story of empire building in the United States, and a different tactic that is used, I argue, not only because of the French and the way that DuSable's treatment and relationship with indigenous tribes is very much related to the way that the French saw themselves relating to and relying on indigenous cultures. New Orleans is probably the best example of that. But then when you think about that in comparison to something, with the way the British were thinking about empire on and colonies on the eastern board of the country, there's a lot less flexibility that's already starting to crop up in interracial relationships. So there's, the United States could have gone in any way, in many ways, like kind of in terms of thinking about it as an empire or a colony, right? If the French had been the ones to settle and win, quote, all of this land, then how would that have looked differently than, again, the English version of this, which again is much more about separation rather than intermarriage, interaction. Again, not that the French are perfect, it's still a colony, it's still not their land, but it's still different And DuSable is an example of that.
And then when you say interracial relationship, and that was not uncommon back then for Native American women to marry outside of their tribe. Is that correct, Monica? Was that a common custom?
Well, from the examples of my family, yeah. They're totally
well, apparently 200 years ago also, that was a custom. And some historians actually made the point that that was one of the ways to ensure that you would be successful in your business if you came here as an entrepreneur, was to marry into a tribe, because they had been there, they had all the connections, and then you are accepted, and then you can build your business. And so DuSable wasn't the only one. And some of the other pioneers who came after DuSable, coming from Quebec in Canada, joining the DuSable settlement, and with the Native Americans, I understand that some of them also, they married into Native American tribes. So it sounds like that's a custom that started a long time ago. Is that something that is ongoing 200 years later, Monica? Are Native Americans still intermarrying, have interracial marriage, or has that changed over time?
Oh, that's definitely something we see a lot of times. And because most people just have this stereotypical view, this is what a Native person should look like or supposed to look like, that all gets jumbled. So I actually recently did a children's book about mixed identity, and it's called Journey of the Freckled Indian. And it's about this little girl that gets picked on at her school. And she doesn't quite know how to embrace both sides. So her father is Native and her mother is white. So she ends up going up to Alaska. This is an Alaskan story, and ends up going on this fantastical journey, meeting some different creatures and stuff, but also talking with her grandfather, who is very, he makes the point in the book, like, look at this cafe, and he just shows her this scene where it's different people from all different backgrounds. Like, mixing happens all the time, and that's okay. And you should be able to embrace all sides, all cultures, and just know who you really are. Nobody else can take that away. Nobody can say, oh, well, you have to be this certain way. So that is something that I want to help push, that sort of message. And I like to think that me being a mixed person myself, I could be, what DuSable and Kittihawa's child would have looked like, So I think this is just a fascinating.
So in other words, it is quite likely that Suzanne DuSable looked like you.
Possibly, yeah. Yeah.
Suzanne was the daughter of Jean Baptiste and Kittihawa. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we don't have any picture of either Suzanne, the daughter, mm-hmm. or Jean Jr., the son. We don't know what they look like.
Yeah.
And Jean died quite early, actually. I think he died before Jean Baptiste died. Mm-hmm. But Suzanne, the daughter, married a Frenchman. I believe he was from Canada and migrated to the area. And they had a daughter together, Eulalie. But we don't know what happened to them after that. And Courtney, historians have been looking into descendants of the DuSables. Do we have any more recent information as far as what happened to them, what happened to Suzanne?
We do not. Again, a little bit more outside of my research, but I think the most important part of what comes out is how these multiracial groups claim DuSable in Chicago over time. So despite maybe us not having a ancestral understanding of lineage, you can argue that the various indigenous groups, and as more Black people migrate to Chicago, the late 1800s into the Great Migration, we see DuSable claimed as the Black father of Chicago, with a more heterogeneous understanding of that draws in, again, Black people of various backgrounds. Indigenous people keep his history alive with, you know, this oral tradition of the first white man in Chicago being Black. You know what I mean? That's one way that folks learn about who he was. And by having those folks claim him, again, multiracially over time, I would say that's really the thing that fascinates me about his story, and then how Haitian people, as they migrate to Chicago, also claim him. So a lot of people claim DuSable as their ancestor in Chicago as a way of claiming space, as a better way of understanding how Chicago is not really the white city, even though it claims to be. And by having the story of DuSable, various Black, brown groups kind of lay claim and again, name themselves as having legacy and having legitimacy in Chicago.
Well, it's a good thing that DuSable is bringing so many different groups together behind him and behind his name. Is there another example of a Black man who has founded a city in the United States that you are aware of, Courtney?
Yeah, in New York. I am forgetting the name of the individual now, but it's a man of Latinx descent who is actually, when you go back to it in a similar way that what happens with DuSable and the Kinseys, right? There becomes a person who moves into DuSable's house and claims to be the founder of Chicago in a very white sense, right? In a similar way that happens to New York. When you go a little bit farther back with the oral traditions and such, you find out about this individual.
And he actually founded a city in New York?
Settlement, yes.
That particular person, he had also a settlement.
Yeah.
So with that example, Courtney, can you tell us a little bit, why did it take so long? How come the name of DuSable is so little known in the school systems in Chicago, and many Chicagoans, when you talk to them, they don't know who DuSable is? I think recently, thanks to the work of the coalition, there has been some improvement, but why has it been so difficult to get DuSable recognized, then for him to be accepted as the founder of Chicago, and then for him to get a park built after him?
I think it goes again to how we view ourselves as a city and how we view ourselves as a nation, right? And these are issues that we're talking about currently in our issues and discussions of monuments, of the naming of streets, the naming of all sorts of things. Putting a name on something is, again, a source of power. And so for DuSable in particular, and Mark Rosier talks a lot about this in his book, there is a concerted campaign after DuSable leaves to erase him from the history of Chicago. You know, whether it's Wabun, which is Juliet Kinsey's, you know, the first history of Chicago, where she downplays the role of DuSable and then declares that her father-in-law was the founder of the city. Whether it's John Wentworth, one of the first historians in Chicago, who puts out these fear-mongering ideas that if DuSable had been the founder, then he would have turned Chicago into a Haitian colony, a Black colony for Black freedom. And we have to remember, we're talking about this is when the United States is building itself off of slavery, off of the labor of Black people. And so why would we talk about DuSable as being a person who is not only not an enslaved person, but a businessman, a diplomat, a married man, a man who is likely literate, at the very least able to grow a business for 20 years. It pushes up against that narrative of Black bodies are only good for slavery. And so we have to understand that we don't start to hear about DuSable again until after the institution of slavery ends in 1865 in the United States. It's not until the late 1800s into the 1893 World's Fair, really at the 1933 World's Fair, where Black people start to name DuSable in a public way again. And then it takes again until 1968, which is not at all, should not be surprising when you consider the social revolution that the United States was in, and I would say globally we were in, for Chicago to finally say, all right, yeah, that's true, he's the founder. So it doesn't happen until 68. Then 20 years after that, with Chicago's first Black mayor to then say, okay, we should dedicate the land. It just, this story of DuSable to me is very much about the history of how we deal with race in this country. What we want to talk about, what we don't want to talk about, who we name, how we name things. And it takes us time. Like it takes, all of this has taken so much time, but it follows a very similar story of how this country continues to lag in looking back and be honest about our treatment of Black people, our treatment of Indigenous people. Hiding these stories allows us to not deal with that. And so that's at least my work, believing in connecting how it is, it helps us to better understand racial politics in Chicago and more largely in the United States.
Exactly. That is certainly a reflection of that particular political environment. Absolutely. We have with us online Paul Montes, and Paul is the president of the DPAC, what we call the DuSable Park Advisory Council. Thanks to the work of Friends of the Parks, we were able to put that together while working with the Chicago Park District. So we now have an official neighborhood vigilante, I don't think Paul is gonna like that word, vigilante group, kind of watching after DuSable Park. So I'd like to bring Paul in for that particular question that Courtney just addressed. Why has it taken so long? So as the president of the DPAC, Paul, what is your thought on that and what is your perspective there?
Well, it's taken so long because, and I agree with what she just said, our politics in Chicago in particular, it's been very difficult for individuals to be recognized, especially those that have significantly contributed to the history of Chicago. I mean, over the years, this park has been, we're 30 years out. We're actually 33 years out from its actual dedication. Yet there's been no movement to build this park. Unfortunately, throughout the city, there have been brand new parks built in almost every neighborhood. But this park, which is probably the most important park for our city, named after our founder, has not been built. And I think there's some political undertones as to why it hasn't been built at this point in time.
Okay. Okay. We also have with us, thank you, Paul. We also have with us online somebody who is another neighbor of the park. Gail Spring is with us, and she's a former president of SOAR, which is the Streeterville Organization of Active Residents. They do a lot of things in Streeterville, not far from the future DuSable Park. And she's been involved also in working with the DuSable Park Coalition in trying to move things forward together with the park. Gail, as a long-time neighbor, resident of DuSable Park, what is your perspective on that particular question, on the meaning of DuSable Park and why it's taking so long to actually finish it? You are on mute, Gail. You need to unmute yourself. Okay, try again, Gail.
There we go. All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. And it's so nice to be here. And it's been great to be part of the DuSable Park Coalition, as well as the PAC, the Park Advisory Council. I do live like right down the block from DuSable Park, and it, you know, Streeterville definitely as a neighborhood really celebrates our history. So from Cap Streeter to the namesake of Streeterville to DuSable and Kittihawa, you know, we really appreciate what has come before. And so we really want to celebrate DuSable and Kittihawa in the future. So I think it's, I mean, I look out right now, right out to DuSable every single day to the park. And the fact that it has taken so long to get this done, I think this is one of the most key locations in the whole city for absolutely gorgeous locations for a park. So I am happy that DuSable is recognized in such an amazing location. I think it will be, someday, hopefully, someday very soon, will get done. This neighborhood, though, in South Streeterville has taken, 25 years now that I have lived here, just has taken this time to get developed. So that's I think part of the whole slow factor of getting everything done. However, this location, it didn't really have access to it either for all these years. But it is such a great location that, you just wish that the city would have addressed this, 30 years ago and had finished this park. So it would have been great. I'm just happy, like everyone else, that all the cleanup, the thorium cleanup has been done, and that we are seeing some progress. But it is too bad that it hasn't been done a long time ago. So there's, as a one of the things, like I think it's fabulous that the DuSable recognition and the Native American Indigenous people recognition is coming together. As like we support families, and this shows, a whole connection with families here as well. So I think it is really neat to be educating the public, educating our residents, that it's Native Americans as well as Haitian and DuSable and the founders and the history of Chicago. So it's so cool that it brings everything together. So I think that, is that much more special. So I just think I'm so happy to have it here in the neighborhood. It is disappointing that it's taking this long. So I'm with you on all of that.
Great, thanks. Do you have faith that within the next few years, we're gonna have the DuSable Park?
You know what, with the flyover bridge getting done, that gives me faith, because even if there was a holdup on the development of 400 Lakeshore Drive, we now will have access where we didn't before. So there's no reason that this should not get done outside of funding. But, but at least we are moving forward with the city's commitment to the 5 million.
And given the current economic situation, because of the virus, do you think there is a chance that the developer may not find the financing for that project, and therefore the park is not gonna be built?
I do not foresee that. This company, Related Midwest, is so highly capitalized. And it will take them several years to finish the project. And by then, I really think a lot of our real estate market will have come back from, what we're experiencing right now, which I think, short term being maybe a year or two might be, a downturn in our real estate in downtown high-rise living. However, living downtown and being downtown Chicago, I think will always have a desirability. We just have to bring, all this consumer confidence and, get things back. They might never go back to what we considered normal, but they will swing back, much further towards that from what we're seeing right now.
Great, that's good news. We hope you are right and that they're gonna find the money and we're gonna have the park soon. We also have with us online, I believe, the current president of DuSable Heritage Association, Edzer Cantave. And you saw Edzer earlier in the advocacy video when he kept asking the question, what happened to DuSable? All those people who came across the land, they didn't stay, but yet they have their name engraved somewhere. And DuSable, who decided to stay, doesn't have his name there. So I'd like to ask Edzer his perspective as far as the meaning for the Haitian community of DuSable being the founder of Chicago and naming a park after him. Edzer?
Hello, thank you, and hello everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here and in so select a company. I see some illustrious people around, some dignitaries of all sorts, and And it's a pleasure also for me to say hello to and to Erica. Erica, is Erica there?
Yeah, she's there. She hears you.
All right then, yeah, because well, I'm not gonna say that she's my partner in crime. No, she's my partner in a very wonderful project because she modeled
I
for Kittihawa.
must remind the audience that what Edzer is saying, Edzer is one of the model for that big inflatable head that you saw at the beginning in the videotape. That's Edzer is representing Jean Baptiste Pointe DuSable and Monica representing
Monica.
Kittihawa DuSable.
I'm sorry, I said Erica. Monica, I'm sorry about that. Yes, and well, so what does this represent? What's in the name? To me, that's recognition. That's connection. That's legacy. This is all that, and this is symbolic because we need symbols. We need signs to connect with the past, you know, to feel the present and then for an outlook to the future. So we need that. So when we see that a park's gonna be named after DuSable, I mean, the Haitian community is elated. So that's something it's been a long time coming, but eventually, as Paul said, as Gail said, eventually it's gonna be coming. And but what will it represent for us, Haitians, for not just us Haitians, because DuSable is somebody who can be claimed by everybody. This is not, we cannot box him into one sector, because his past there's nothing that remotely looks like polarization. He was a uniter. He was, and his settlement was proof to that. Because in his settlement, there was room for everybody. There was room for people who were fleeing intolerance and, from Europe, from Canada. They were welcome.
And I think that's an important point, Edzer. I don't think DuSable is just a Haitian person. I think the story of DuSable can touch so many different groups. As a Black man, what he did was so unusual. You don't have to be Haitian to embrace the story of DuSable and to be proud of him. And in fact, we have one question here from somebody, one of the participants, asking what history is being taught in the schools. And I'm guessing the person means as related to DuSable. And that's something I'm gonna quickly ask Courtney to comment on that. Since she's in the school system, she may not know the answer. And then there is somebody else in the audience I'd like to invite to help with that answer. So I'll go with Courtney first, if you want to take a shot at this one.
The last 20 years or so of history education, social studies at the K-8 level has definitely gone downward. From what I'm understanding from K-12 teachers, in particular elementary school teachers, social studies is like 20 minutes a week total. So if we think about how education system has changed for more students to be focused on testing, standardized testing and passing them, due to the ways that funding is tied to these metric testing. Students are getting very little history at all to begin with. When I was a kid, and you know, it's in the 90s, the history was very much America focused. And so it was not really about, I don't remember much Chicago history, but I know that it was much more about like, here are the states, here is the, you know, Bill of Rights, here's the first presidents, here's, you know, slavery was kind of bad, and then the Civil War happened and Abraham Lincoln did all of that by himself. And so there's a lot that can be said about that, but it's not surprising that to me that by the time I teach college students, so by the time they come to my classroom, typically this is the first time they're hearing anything about Black history to begin with, but then more specifically for those even in Chicago, not knowing much about DuSable unless their school was different in some way.
Therefore, when you were in school, had you ever heard about DuSable?
No.
No, okay, that's terrible. The other person who may help us with the answer is Arnold Romeo. I believe he's with us today. Arnold Romeo is a part of Friends of DuSable, and that's a group that has been active for a long time. During those last 20 years, they've been very active in the DuSable Park Coalition. And they are the group who at one point picked up from another group called the DuSable League. They started doing the annual DuSable Memorial near the statue. They also pushed very hard for the city of Chicago to adopt an ordinance recognizing the 4th of March as DuSable Day. And the 4th of March was the date of incorporation of Chicago as a city. And so there is an ordinance actually asking everybody to celebrate DuSable Day on March the 4th. And Friends of DuSable, they were very active in making that happen. But the other thing that they did also, they got involved with the school system of Chicago. They were giving awards, having students write essays about DuSable every year. And on DuSable Day, they would give them awards. So if somebody knows about what's happening in the school system and whether DuSable is being taught, it should be Arnold Romeo. Arnold? We cannot hear you, Arnold. Okay, I think it's better.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
How are you, Serge?
Good, Arnold. Welcome.
Good to hear good presentations. Good to hear everyone
Thank you.
Chiming in and lifting up our first non-native settler, founder of the great city of Chicago. I think Serge, you kind of laid some of those things out that we talked about, and I don't necessarily believe this is the venue to have a longer discussion, which I believe is needed concerning the recognition of DuSable. But what I will say is that the Friends of DuSable and the City of Chicago Advisory Council on African Affairs recognize the issue of the lack of education concerning most Black history, specifically not DuSable. And in terms of doing an outreach to Chicago through the Catholic and the public schools, we got those, we formed the relationships with those schools and had an annual essay contest between the 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade students. And the idea was to encourage classes to do their research on DuSable. We provided them with history. And so it is one way to broaden the scope of who knows about DuSable, who understands about DuSable. Parents were helping students. Students were, writing these essays. And they were part of the city celebration that recognizes DuSable, which is on the city's birthday. And so I know there are a lot of people trying to do a lot of things right now, but there is actually a date set for recognition of DuSable in Chicago. And so as you said, Serge, it's there. All people have to do is do it. You know what I mean? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just do it. It's laid out in that document as to how organizations can participate, how businesses can participate, how schools can participate, how every sector of Chicago can participate in honoring the founder of this great city. And so, you have to go around the way. You can fight about the fact that this is not being done, or you can just pick up the mantle and do it. And so that my encouragement today is to ask people, everybody on this, on this thread today, on this live stream, to encourage people to look and find the ways that we can do those things to acknowledge our founder and broaden the understanding of who he is and what he's contributed to this great city.
Yes, and I know, Arnold, you and your group, you tried very hard to do those two things, to have DuSable Day recognized and celebrated by all institutions, all the schools, the universities, the museums. Everybody should actually make sure they celebrate that day. And the second thing, trying to include in the curriculum of the Chicago Public School some basic knowledge of the founder of the city. You tried very hard, and it seems to me this is something that we all gonna have to keep working hard and make it happen. There are some comments in the chat room, people mentioning, well, we have a Pulaski Day, and we have a Columbus Day. And why not start there? And if we actually had a real DuSable Day, perhaps the school children would be more engaged during that day to learn about DuSable and what he did. And so this is gonna be a challenge for us as a coalition, and something we're gonna have to keep working at. But
so, Serge,
yes,
what I will say is that the Pulaski Day is a City of Chicago holiday, and it falls every few years. It falls on the day that is set up to recognize DuSable, which is the city's birthday. That is a standard day that's already in existence. The city recognizes DuSable on the city's birthday every year. That's been going on, and that continues to go on. And so, again, I think we have a wheel. I don't think we have to reinvent it. I think we have to go ahead and claim the fact that there's a wheel, and to make that a more enhanced recognition day, and utilize that day.
Sure, absolutely. That's gonna be a challenge, but a definite goal for us to have. I'd like to bring Monica back on. As part of those comments, I know there has been a movement now as we are talking about what's in a name. We're talking about the name of a founder of a city. We're talking about the name of a park named after someone. But there is also that other name, the name of a holiday, the name of Columbus Day versus Indigenous People Day. So Monica, you are still with us. Could you comment on that? What is the current perspective of different indigenous groups as far as how to celebrate on a yearly basis what we are now thinking of Indigenous Day?
So just to comment a little bit before about the education system. I remember going to school and actually having a teacher who was about to start talking about, this is how the United States began, completely dismissing everything that had to do with Native Native people, Native culture. And they're like, yeah, this is 1,000 years, or it's how many ever thousands of years to cover, but we don't need to know about that. And that really irked me. So that kind of pushes me to keep pushing for representation. It really does matter. And having certain days that are dedicated to the acknowledgement and the remembrance of certain people, their accomplishments, you know, and for Columbus Day to celebrate somebody who, you know, essentially opened the floodgates to really having this European conquest where, oh, this is all unclaimed land, even though there were many societies that were already well established and had been there for millennia. So I'm really vocal about the need to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. I spoke out at the Chicago Public Schools Board in February, and they were actually able to change and acknowledge that it would be Indigenous Peoples Day, not Columbus Day. That in turn got Lori Lightfoot, other Italian American groups very upset with us, and basically coming out after the American Indian Center. So we have not stopped our fight. We've gotten many more aldermen, more Italian American groups that, you know, recognize that there is a change that needs to happen. Because if you're celebrating somebody who came in and did all these devastating things, what does that say about you as a society? And instead, we should actually acknowledge that no, there were many, many millions of people that were here on these continents all throughout. And, you know, they've already had many other dealings with other cultures. I mean, there's some evidence of African explorers that came over, and, you know, evidence that they may have started well, you know, just interacted with some indigenous tribes in Central America and the Olmecs, I believe. So, you know, that there's just a lot. There's still a lot of work to be done, and it's all part of this whole erasure culture where it's okay that we only celebrate this one particular group, like if it's only white people. And I don't think that that's something that really needs to happen, because there are plenty of great accomplishments and wonderful, you know, feats that other societies and other cultures have done and brought to the table.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I see that Paul Montes has made the comment that there is actually an annual celebration that take place that with an essay contest together with the Cultural Museum. Paul, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So every year, basically on Chicago's birthday, there has been for the last, I want to say it's the last 7 to 10 years, there's been an essay contest for children, for school children through the public school system. And there has been an award that's been given out to 3 different grades for essays that have been written in regard to DuSable and his contributions to Chicago. So it is actually being celebrated, and it continues to be celebrated. That's something that we participate in almost every year. So it's out there, but it just needs more recognition. And again, it needs to also get into a larger group of schools. So there are only a few schools that continue to participate because they know about it, but it's the Chicago History Museum that actually puts it on.
Mm-hmm. I see. And that's something that you think is gonna continue to happen in the coming years?
It'll definitely continue.
Another comment that I'm seeing in the chat room, Courtney is mentioning that the same problem that Native Americans have had here in the United States, by seeing that with the arrival of a European person, everything got displaced, and that European person is being recognized now. The same phenomenon happened also on the island of Haiti, and which was inhabited by indigenous people before 1492. And then when Christopher Columbus arrived there, then of course everything started there. He changed the name of the island. Instead of Haiti, he called it Hispaniola. And so it's a phenomenon that you find in different parts of the world, and different cultures, different societies are struggling to see how they can recapture their history, their identity, in spite of what happened to them. So a lot of that happening there. Courtney, you wanted to say something about that? Okay, we made the point.
I guess I was unmuted, or I was on mute. I couldn't unmute myself. I guess I'll just say that Haitians got rid of their Columbus statue in 1986.
That's right. It was dumped in the harbor around that time for the same reason. And okay, and I know Edzer has commented on that as well several times, that the Haitians kind of took the lead in recapturing their past and their history and their identity. But there is something I wanted to ask Monica, which is that as part of this conversation we are having today, we often hear that some of the Native American groups, they voice their resentment that they had been there for a long time. And then somebody like DuSable came from wherever, he comes here and suddenly is being recognized as the founder of the land, when in fact all those tribes had been there even before DuSable. Is there some ground to that, Monica? Is there some resentment against people like even like DuSable, who came and he didn't colonize anybody, he didn't fight with anybody, he came and he lived with anybody, he worked with them. So is there still a sense of resentment that he's getting all the credit?
I think it has to do with the idea of being erased again, the whole erasure, where, okay, yeah, you're going to recognize this non-native person, but not necessarily recognize that people have been here and it was established. But what I think is really beautiful about the whole story with DuSable is that, you know, he opened this up to even more, and to not just Native people. Like, he wanted to help open the doors and show that this is how we can all interact and actually grow and, you know, be together. And the fact that he married Kittihawa, who comes from, you know, the Anishinaabe people, women kind of help run things. So I imagine that she probably was like, listen, I'm going to show you, this is how we do it. So yeah, I really, really hope that people can move past certain ideas that they have. And I think it goes beyond just like, racism is usually just in the category of this is white versus black, and that's not the case. Racism is racism, and that comes with all communities. Unfortunately, I have also experienced that from my Native community, where I've been referred to as the black one, where it's like, why would you necessarily focus on certain parts of me, and that's how you relate and how you treat me. So I think even within Native culture, which is something that, you know, is an uncomfortable conversation, but these conversations need to happen, where people have this preset idea of, well, why are we acknowledging Black people? Or they keep thinking that Black people are inferior, and they're not at all.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, well, there is no question that DuSable alone would not have been to carry the load of everything he was doing in his compound, and definitely his wife was an important part of that. Mm-hmm. We also know that DuSable was arrested and spent a year in Michigan in jail. Well, who was running the house, the business, and the children and all that while he was away? It was Kittihawa. Yeah. So absolutely, they both should get credit. Mm-hmm. So therefore, Monica, when the DuSable Park is built, what is your idea of what should be represented on the park to give proper credit to the couple, not just to DuSable, but to Kittihawa as well? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, everything that's happening with the monuments, like there's actually a monuments committee where they're reviewing certain things throughout the city. So, you know, the idea of, do we have statues anymore? Do we just have titles? Do we have plaques? Like, do we do something with the land and just like have more indigenous plants or things like that? So I'm not 100% sure what that would look like, but I think it's very important that whenever, you know, his history is told, that it's DuSable and Kittihawa, because she played a much more important role than people give her credit for. And a lot of times men don't always highlight women. And I can't tell you how many history classes and art classes or whatever where women are very rarely acknowledged for their contributions and their efforts. So that I would like to see part of the change, that she does get, you know, some credit. And, you know, also embrace, like I said earlier, just embrace that this was a multicultural couple, and that should be something that's celebrated.
Exactly. And then the park would be a medium, a vehicle to do that, to recognize that early multiculturalism that characterized Chicago from its birth. I don't know if Gail is still with us, and I know she has worked with, at our ceremony, we had Andrew and Dennis with us, and as well. I don't know if Gail is there and would like.
I am, Serge.
I would like to comment on that. What would be the best representation of Native American culture on DuSable Park?
I would think something that recognizes even family and women. The woman in the family was a key person in the Native American lifestyle. That just in the things that I have learned through my history classes, and having something that recognizes both DuSable and Kittihawa and the family, I think would be really key to having in DuSable Park. So it's such a gateway into the city. It's such an area that's going to be seen and recognized by millions. And so having something that recognizes both of them together and the family, I think would just be something very, very special to have. And that would really resonate and really keep the history of everyone, you know, of all nationalities alive.
And I must say that at our last DuSable Memorial on the 29th of August, when Andrew and Dennis did the ceremony for recognition of the land, the blessing of the land, a lot of people commented that was such an emotional and inspiring moment. So I think there is a need at large to see that kind of inclusion of everybody, including indigenous people, in our recognition of the early history of Chicago. So that's something I think that's important for a lot of people. I'd like to ask Juanita. She has a perspective on how we can also use DuSable Park, not only to recognize different cultures, but to make it an open space where Black children, Black boys will feel comfortable participating in what's happening on the park. Juanita, did you want to comment on that?
I mean, I'm trying to be controversial and invite others to speak to it, not just me, but you know, as we asked the question about how well school children in Chicago are taught about DuSable, you know, we would hope that lots of school buses would come down there with kids to do, you know, field trips one day when we're not all stuck in COVID. And that it would really be an opportunity to inspire Chicago's youth to see a Black man and a Native woman, you know, lifted up as, you know, having such a key role in what the city has become. Yet we are also in a moment where we see images on TV all too often of bridges lifted to keep people out of downtown because of fear with the looting and protests. And so what do we do about that? I mean, really, it's so poignant because, you know, one of those bridges that we see lifted is the DuSable Bridge right next to the DuSable bust, right? And that was kind of my response, is just there's so much poignancy in that, and we have so much work to do in feeling like we should all be in community together in each other's spaces and not be segregated out from one another. So I don't have an answer. I'm more just, you know, saying we need to name that reality. And what do we do with that?
Well, actually, that's an interesting question. About 15 years ago, when the Chicago Park District put together a steering committee to help design DuSable Park, that's one of the topics that was brought up by our group, our steering committee, when we proposed to them that during the summer, the coalition could hold classes on the park and invite students from different neighborhoods, the South Side, the West Side, to come and sit down and learn about history, the history of Chicago, that Courtney and Monica just told us they never learned those things in school. And maybe part of our mission as a coalition would be that. What Arnold has been trying to do and push into the school system, maybe we can do some of that ourselves. Why not bring some of the students together during the summer and have an outdoor class where we just talk about history and early Chicago, early American Midwest, and get those youth away from their context of violence and poverty and have them look at other things in life. So that's certainly something I think to keep in mind, Juanita.
Anybody else?
I would like to say it's Gail Screen, that I think this will be such a special location where I agree with Serge. It should be a place of respect of the legacy and education, and there's ceremonies that could be done in addition to like education sessions. So there's a lot of different opportunity there for educating as well as keeping the history alive and really creating a very respectful, almost blessed kind of location that is, you know, just really kind of honored.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to, I think it's much, there's work to be done for that to occur. I think we're hopeful. This sounds very nice, but there's a lot of work to be done. The idea to me of a busload of Black children from the South Side having to be bused to downtown to experience their culture is mildly horrific to me personally, but maybe that's just me. I think there's something to be said about how Chicago segregates itself and uses police and uses bridges and uses spaces to say certain people are allowed here and other people are not. So it's devastating to think that you have to bus, again, a group of kids to downtown Chicago, like where they live.
Yeah. Well, Courtney,
you know, to see the lake, that's the first time in their life they've seen the lake.
Well, Courtney, I don't like the word bust, and that's not what I had in mind. What I meant was,
I mean, they said buses.
No, but what I meant, let me rephrase. What I meant was, it would be nice to invite different youth groups to come and visit the park.
And then what does that mean then for the folks who live in that area? How do they respond to whether it's a bus, a train, they come walking together?
Absolutely.
For a group of Black and brown children to be seen in that space.
That part we're gonna have to address with the different community groups, with our coalition. But the idea in itself to have young people come and visit the park, and while they are visiting it, they are learning about the history of Chicago. That's the side I was kind of emphasizing. Certainly, it's more complex than that. And as you said, it's gonna require more work. But we have somebody else with us now who finally joined us, the famous and infamous Fahim Majid. He's the person responsible for those big heads of Monica and there that you saw in that videotape. And Fahim has been addressing some of what we are discussing now. With his public art, is already engaging the city and the youth. So Fahim, go ahead, tell us what your perspective is on that.
Well, hello everyone. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm just edging to jump in. Oh man, this is my jam. This is what I want to. So I think just getting right to it a little bit is that we're talking about a couple of different things. We're in a moment of talking about monuments, right? And I would totally agree with Courtney about the difference between intention, right, and then outcomes. So when you move people from one side of town to another side of town, that's bodies in space. That means something, not only to the people moving and what that means, but also people there. So I think it's the challenge is the expectation that one part is going to solve all these things. And I think I really challenge us to say, not think of it as a solution, but think of it as a part of a much larger dialogue. And that's kind of how I think about my practice. Who wants to be in a community where one person can solve it? Like, that's not a community, the very nature of that. So we're saying that I think it's a little bit of the journey. And Serge and the coalition have been really good about kind of reaching out, inviting, and trying to be very inclusive as much as possible along the lines of kind of doing this park. So I do think it's a little bit of the design process as well. And I think in thinking about the park, let's be honest, I mean, the park is really about a monument. It's really about acknowledgement. And I do think if you don't acknowledge that the park is really about making a statement, and then you say, but the statement's going to do all these other things, I think we're not really seeing what it is. I think we have to think about what the monument is, and then we can think about how we not only make the monument, who we get to make the monument, and how, and then what it does. Because it's not a huge plot of land. It's actually, even for people downtown that live downtown, it's kind of hard to access. But it's kind of premier land. It has high visibility as well. So those are design challenges. And if we say we want to be inclusive in the community, I think we have to spend the time to really identify who are the representatives of that community, because we can't deal with. I never say I work with community. I work with people who work in community, right? So we have to identify who are the stakeholders. And I think the coalition has a really great kind of beginning of that. But I do think there's some ways to think it, kind of eke voices in. I'm really happy to see Monica here. She's someone who I've worked with quite a bit. Obviously, she's on the monument. But even beyond that, although the inflatable was so amazing, it's actually the journey to get there that we can discuss at another time, how we actually got to know each other, the things that I learned in the process of how to be respectful about mound builders. So I'm actually going to throw my hat in and think about people like Santiago X, artists who I think about land as sculpture. I mean, we have a mound out there already. Let's think about that as a piece of it, and think differently about how we think about monuments as well. So there's a lot of work there. I'm really excited about the process, and I'm happy to be here.
Great. And I think your group is going to have a big role in bringing different communities together, whether school children on the park itself, to your art. You would be easily the glue to make that happen between different groups.
Serge, can I add one more thing? I think back to Courtney's point, I think the way that we can think about how a park can actually impact the city is a curriculum, right? I think it's about education. I think the point is to make, not necessarily to bring kids there, but make the kids want to come there as an option. But if they don't come there, they shouldn't feel like they missed out. So it's really about how we pump things out into the city, how we as all residents of the city are engaging throughout the city. And that's just one aspect. We should pay homage. Love to come to the museum, but I can't come to the museum all the time. But when I do, I want to feel like I have a place there. So I think I'm excited to think about that. We have talked about curriculum and what that looks like to support that. And I think Peggy has actually done some of that in the past.
That's right. That makes a lot of sense. There are a couple of people here, Maria Villalobos and Grace Newman. I'd like to ask Juanita to quickly introduce them. I think there are a couple of comments you'd like to make, Juanita.
Yeah, well, Maria Villalobos is someone that I have been recently getting to know. She's newer to Chicago as in the architecture department at IIT. And we have met because we are both on the Lincoln Yards Community Advisory Council together. And when she opened her mouth, I said to myself, everyone on this committee must think that Juanita and Maria know each other and are conspiring, because she says things that I would say. And so we have taken upon ourselves to get to know each other better. And it turns out that she lives in a building looking down on DuSable Park. And so we got into a conversation. She's an immigrant from Venezuela, and also worked in city planning and design in New York for a long time. And so I told her we're scooping her up here at Friends of the Parks before anybody gets their hands on her. But we were having a conversation about the process to actualize DuSable Park, knowing that there was a framework plan that was done in 2006 and will very much need to be refreshed, right? And now here we are in this moment with all the stress around what is a privately owned public space versus an actual public park. And DuSable Park is a public park, yet it's on the end of the Riverwalk, which is not that. And there are conversations in the community about, folks wanting to feel safe and all that, right? So in the midst of that, what what's going to happen to refresh that framework plan. And the Park District has talked about it happening. We know that Related Midwest knows that it needs to happen. But how do we, as Friends of the Parks and the DuSable Park Coalition, make sure that there is really strong community voice in the design? Many of the landscape elements that were in that framework plan were meant to call us back to the time of, when DuSable and Kittihawa would have been in the area. And so Maria and I were chatting about this and came up with this idea that maybe some of her students need to help us out to think about this. But I just wanted to invite her to say hello and, give us her view from, above in her home nearby, and, what she is hearing and seeing today as we keep building this coalition even bigger.
Okay.
Hey everybody, Juanita, thank you so much. This is so exciting, you guys, this meeting to hear. I've been looking at that, but I live in the Lake Point Tower. I'm a new assistant professor in the Master of Landscape Architecture at IIT. This is my third semester here. So, but I'm not new to fighting autocracy. So I'm Venezuelan. I recognize oppression when I see it really quickly. Because I think that's really what we are all so passionate about deconstructing, right? Like all those places that in our landscapes, in our cities, remind us of what autocracy looks like, right? And I could not be more excited about that idea that you were all putting together, like Serge was, imagining youth learning at the water's edge about their history, right? Like sort of these landscape academies, no? And Courtney and Fahim were talking about, well, but not just in one point, like this is a system, right? This is a new kind of way of engaging with our lakefront. And yes, Chicago has the most amazing public park system, right? It continues 20-something miles of open space, and yet, as democratic as it might look, what will finally democratize it is when we bring these educational projects out to the water's edges. I mean, this is like you guys are singing my music. It's like, so.
Well, Maria.
Like, yes, let's do this. So
well,
I just want to put the IIT resources, like we can do seminars together, studios together, workshops together, because there is also an anti-racism conversation we need to take onto academia, Monumentality was not, it came from academia. So I think deconstructing those monuments is as much a physical exercise as it is an intellectual one, from the ground up in the ways in which we teach.
So Maria,
I am so excited.
Yes, so Maria, maybe we can meet and talk some more about that. I think this is a great idea. And the whole idea of doing public education on the lakefront is something that nobody is talking about and thinking about. And it is such a great idea. I must tell you that an Edzer is there on this call, the president of DuSable Heritage. DuSable Heritage has been doing that for the past few years, giving a free walking tour from Michigan Avenue all the way to the lake, and talking about history, the early American Midwest, the American Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, the French Revolution, how Chicago was born. And as you are walking along the Chicago River toward the lake, you are learning history. And perhaps that's something that we can introduce in the curriculum of the school. So let's talk some more about that when we have a chance. Juanita, I think you had also another guest you wanted to quickly say something now?
I just wanted to make sure that Maria's voice got in there, because I think a great addition to the team as we continue to grow this, and lots of females on the team too. Woohoo!
Thank you.
Oh, great.
I'm excited to meet you guys.
Yes, absolutely. And we hope to meet you again in person Maria, so we can talk a little bit more. We will tell you what DuSable Heritage is already doing as far as teaching along the Chicago River, and it's there put together a whole set of things that are too long to put in a videotape, but very important for people to know. So we can share that with you and get your input on that.
And
so
remembering our history, when COVID is over, we need to celebrate at Island Party Hut on the Riverwalk, assuming it's still there. We thank them for our support, for their support of our work in the past, and we had some fun celebrating in the past. So for those of you who are downtown neighbors, you'll let us know when it's time, and we'll have a few drinks. We brought some special Haitian drinks for the occasion the last time. So
absolutely, we will keep that in mind. And so we are getting to the end of this fascinating conversation. And again, I'd like to thank Friends of the Parks for pushing that whole idea of bringing people around a table every year and have a conversation. Some of the topics may be painful, they may be difficult to talk about, but there is a need. There is a need in our society to have this kind of conversation. So we are very grateful to Friends of the Parks for keeping the torch and keeping that tradition. I also would like to thank my partners in crime today, Courtney and Monica, for their participation. Thank you so much. We've learned so much from the two of you. And certainly our participant at large, Arnold, Fahim, Edzer, Maria Villalobos, Gail Spring, all of you who have participated today, we need you. We need you to stay with us to continue this conversation. And I'm just wondering, how come we are not having this once a week or once a month? Why do we have to wait a whole year to have this kind of conversation, Juanita? It's something to think about, okay?
Well, on that note, I'm going to offer some other opportunities. One of the things that Friends of the Parks is really spending some time thinking about is how to connect with the statewide program called Healing Illinois, which is inviting people to do various types of activities to help us think about how do we heal across all the pain of our racial and social division in this country. And we had already started in the name of a new initiative that we call Common Ground for the Common Good, thinking about how parks really center us geographically and how, you know, our history as a country, despite all the things that are so messed up about it, do include things like, you know, the Boston Common in our colonial days was, you know, was a green space around which kind of the community and government and figuring out how they were going to do life as a new colony and then country was focused around our parks, right? And obviously we remind ourselves that we are also thinking back to way more, you know, the Native American history that we've been talking about today, which has a whole different and healthier relationship to the land. So we want to think about how we use what are called racial healing circles to bring people together to really connect and develop relationships and begin and share stories. And racial healing circles is a big thing that's happening now. And Friends of the Parks has started to do them around the Jackson Park space, bringing together people who don't all agree with each other about whether there should be an Obama Center in Jackson Park, but who reside in the spaces around there and need to figure out how to work together for the best interests of the community. So we've been practicing a little bit already, and we would like to bring together the very diverse interests around DuSable Park, which are both folks who live right there near what will be the park and folks who live all across the city. So that creates another complicated reality. But since we have been training and doing these circles virtually, it works pretty well right at the moment that we are not all physically with one another. We will also be launching into more of that kind of work. And have identified a couple of other parks. Douglas Park, where we talked earlier in our conference about the name change there from Stephen Douglas Park to Frederick and Anna Douglas Park. but we also have a community there where basically half the park is used by the Latino community and the other half is used by the African American community. And we want to be part of how do we bring folks together across the different communities that surround that park to really be working in relationship with one another for the best interests of the park. And in that case, it's also a park that is divided in terms of the wards and has 2 separate aldermen. So there are all kinds of ways in which there's division that needs to be worked through. That's just an example. We hope to do that in some other communities as well. But we're going to make this happen around DuSable Park. So, and it's not about policy issues. It's about getting to know one another at this point, you know, and then how do we then build upon those relationships that are getting deeper and better understandings of one another to continue doing the work together. So we offer that specifically about DuSable. And we'll let you close us off, Serge, about DuSable, and then I will make a couple of announcements regarding the last couple of sessions in our conference.
Yes, I actually have to pull out in 2 minutes. I have another video conference starting in just a few minutes, but certainly, yes, I wanted to thank all of you again to join us in this important conversation. I think we should do that. We should continue to have those conversations and hear everybody's input and perspective. That's the healthy thing to do. I thank again the whole panel today for being in this with me. And I see a comment by Fred Bates that when he was a child, he did learn about DuSable in the school. Well, Fred, we're gonna need to put that back into the schools then after so many years, because apparently they are not doing that anymore. So
well, there's a little irony to it, because he was introduced as the first settler in Chicago. So that twists it a little bit, but nonetheless.
Great. Well, that's good to hear. And we can learn from that and decide how to bring that back into the schools. Well, thank you again, everybody, and stay in touch with us. And we are looking forward to the next conversation around the table. Goodbye.
Well, let's Serge.
Everybody.
Before you all go, we'll let Serge get out, but I just want to mention we have another workshop tomorrow around the confined disposal facility issue on the southeast side, where we're trying to gather up some solutions to what we do with this pollution dump that is on the lakefront and is supposed to be a Chicago Park District park. Yet the Army Corps of Engineers wants to keep dumping pollution there for another 20 years. And it's in an environmental justice community that already bears too much of the burden of our pollution. And we want to work with the community to find a workable solution that does not just dump it somewhere else in the 10th Ward, because that is also something the community is very afraid of. And we want to honor those concerns. We stand with them very much. And, you know, how do we find the right place that is not just dumping it somewhere else? And then next Sunday, not this Sunday, but the next, we will have a virtual ceremony centered around Steelworkers Park and what we usually have, which is an annual Day of the Dead remembrance. And in light of COVID, we will not be able to have a bunch of folks out there around a fire and ofrendas as we often do. And though we have been working on some plans to try to have a bit of a socially distanced option for a few people to be out there every day as COVID numbers inch back up, or not even inch, really go back up really fast. We've been in close conversation with the Steelworkers Park and the alderwoman, and she's really asking us not to bring a lot of bodies out there. So we will, anyway, it was planned to be mostly virtual. We look forward to having folks join us, and we will specifically be focusing on that site and those who've been lost to environmental injustice, but also racism and police brutality, and those lost to COVID-19. So keep an eye on our e-blast and our Facebook page and wherever else you find us, Insta and Twitter, and sign up for those last couple of events. We hope to have you with us. So thanks everybody for hanging with us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.